I lay on the kitchen floor, smelling roast chicken, pine, and my own blood. My stepmother's red dress swayed like a victory flag, while my father stood 3 steps away, eyes glued to the TV, pretending not to see. Then my sister whispered, "I recorded everything. If your Christmas was just the sound of bones hitting cabinets, what would you do with the proof? That single file destroyed my family at a luxury gala 10 years later. My name is Fiona Torres, and I was 22 years old when I realized that the sound of a family breaking is not a loud crash, but a soft, wet thud of bone against wood. It was my first Christmas back in Oak Ridge, Ohio, since graduating from college. I had driven home with a summa cum laude diploma in my trunk and a foolish, fragile hope in my chest. I thought that perhaps the piece of paper with the gold seal would finally buy my ticket into the inner circle of the house I grew up in. I thought that proving I could survive the world outside would make me worthy of the world inside. I was wrong. The air in the house was thick enough to choke on, perfumed with cinnamon sticks, pine needles, and the expensive, cloying vanilla candles my stepmother, Victoria, burned to mask the smell of tension. From the outside, the Torres residence looked like a holiday postcard. Icicles hung perfectly from the eaves, and the wreath on the front door was large enough to swallow a small child. Inside, the tree was a towering spruce, suffocating under the weight of gold and crimson ornaments. Bing Crosby crooned about a white Christmas from the surround sound speakers, his voice smooth and oblivious to the war zone that was our living room. I stood near the kitchen island, wiping a tray of hors d'oeuvres that I had not been invited to eat, only to serve. My hands were red and chapped from 3 hours of washing dishes in scalding water, because the dishwasher was supposedly reserved for the fine china, and Victoria did not trust me to load it correctly. Victoria sat on the plush velvet armchair in the center of the living room, holding court. She wore a dress the color of fresh arterial blood, silk that rippled against her skin every time she laughed, and she laughed often, a high, tinkling sound that signaled to the relatives that everything was perfect, that the Torres family was the envy of the neighborhood. Her daughter, Brielle, sat on the armrest of the chair, looking like a younger, sharper copy of her mother. Brielle was 19, home from her first semester at a fashion institute in the city, and she looked at me with a smirk that suggested she knew exactly where I stood in the hierarchy. "Fiona, honey," Victoria called out, her voice pitching up an octave so my aunts and uncles could hear her sweetness. "Be a lamb and refill Uncle Jerry's eggnog, and check on the roast. We don't want it drying out like last year." She said it with a smile, but her eyes were flat, dead things. It was a calculated humiliation. She knew I had not cooked the roast last year. I had been studying for finals in the library, eating vending machine crackers, but history in this house was whatever Victoria decided it was. I wiped my hands on the apron she had made me wear, a frilly, humiliating thing that clashed with my sensible slacks and blouse, and moved to obey. I could feel my father. Mark, standing by the fireplace, he was swirling the amber liquid in his crystal tumbler, staring intently at the television where a football game played on mute. He did not look at me. He never looked at me when Victoria was in one of her moods. It was his way of surviving, I supposed. If he did not see the servitude, he did not have to feel guilty about it. The evening wore on, a slow grind of servitude. I was 22, a college graduate with a degree in logistics and supply chain management. Yet here I was, being treated like a scullery maid in the house where I had learned to walk. Every time I tried to join a conversation, to mention a job interview I had lined up or a professor who had praised my thesis, Victoria would interrupt. "Oh, Fiona, nobody wants to hear about boring truck routes on Christmas Eve," she would say, patting my arm with a condescension that burned worse than a slap. "Look at Brielle's sketches. She is going to be the next big thing in New York." I swallowed the anger. I swallowed it until it felt like a stone in my gut. I told myself it was just one night. I just had to get through dinner. Then came the scream. It was a theatrical, gasping shriek that cut through the low hum of conversation and the Christmas carols. Victoria stood up abruptly, her hands flying to her bare neck. The room went silent. Uncle Jerry lowered his glass. My father finally looked away from the TV. "My necklace," Victoria gasped, her eyes widening in a performance that deserved an award. "My diamond pendant, Mark, the one you gave me for our 10th anniversary, it is gone." She began to frantically pat the cushions of the chair, the floor, her own chest. Brielle immediately jumped into the act, falling to her knees to search the carpet. "It was just there. Mom," Brielle said, her voice loud and clear. "I saw it when you were opening presents. It was right there." Victoria stopped moving. She stood up slowly, her breathing exaggerated. Her gaze swept across the room, past the aunts, past the cousins, past my father, and locked onto me. I was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, holding a tray of dirty glasses. "Fiona," she said. It was not a question. It was a verdict. "I haven't seen it, Victoria," I said, my voice steady despite the sudden pounding in my ears. "Maybe it fell in the bathroom?" "You were standing behind my chair when you poured the wine," Victoria said. Stepping over the pile of discarded wrapping paper, she moved toward me like a predator closing in on a wounded animal. "You were the only one behind me." "I didn't touch your necklace," I said, gripping the tray tighter. "I was pouring wine. Dad saw me." I looked at my father. He blinked, looking from his wife to me, and took a long sip of his drink. He said nothing. "You have been talking all night about how expensive rent is in the city," Victoria said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper as she closed the distance between us. "How hard it is for scholarship students to make ends meet. It must be tempting, seeing all this wealth when you have nothing." "I didn't take it," I repeated, louder this time. "Check my pockets. Check my bag. I don't care, but don't accuse me of stealing." "Oh, we will check," Victoria sneered. She reached out, her manicured fingers digging into my upper arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong, fueled by a decade of resentment. "But we are not going to make a scene in front of the family. Get in the kitchen." She yanked me. The tray in my hand tipped, and 2 crystal glasses slid off, shattering on the hardwood floor. The sound was like a gunshot. Shards of glass scattered, glittering under the Christmas lights. "Look what you did," Brielle screeched. Victoria dragged me backward into the kitchen. I stumbled, my boots slipping on the sleek floor. But I did not fight back physically. I was in shock. I was a grown woman, a professional, being manhandled like a misbehaving toddler. She shoved me through the doorway and kicked the door shut behind us. The festive noise was instantly muffled, replaced by the hum of the refrigerator and the bubbling of the pot on the stove. The moment the door latched, the mask fell off completely. Victoria released my arm and shoved me hard. I stumbled back, my hip colliding with the granite countertop. Pain shot down my leg, sharp and hot. "You little thief," she hissed. Her face was contorted, the beauty gone, replaced by a grotesque mask of hatred. "Give it to me." "I don't have it," I shouted, straightening up. I was taller than her now, but she made me feel small. "Call the police. Victoria, go ahead. Let them search me. But when they find nothing, you are going to apologize." "Apologize?" She laughed, a harsh barking sound. "To you? You are a parasite. Fiona, a leech, living off your father's guilt while Brielle and I suffer. You think because you went to some college on a charity scholarship that you are better than us? You are nothing. You are trash wrapped in a degree." "I earned that scholarship," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "I worked for everything I have because you made sure Dad didn't give me a dime." That was the trigger. She stepped forward and slapped me. It wasn't a movie slap. It was a messy, violent impact. Her palm caught my cheekbone and my ear. The force of it knocked my head to the side. My teeth cut into the inside of my lip. I tasted copper. My ear rang with a high-pitched whine. I stood there, stunned. I touched my lip and saw blood on my fingers. "You just hit me," I whispered. "I'm 22 years old, and you just hit me." I should have done it years ago, she spat. She grabbed my shoulders and slammed me back against the upper cabinets. The wood groaned under the impact. My head rattled. Give me the necklace, or I swear to God. Fiona, I will destroy you. I will call the police and tell them you attacked me. Who do you think they will believe? The respected banker's wife, or the desperate, broke stepdaughter? She raised her hand again. I flinched, bracing for the blow. The kitchen door swung open. My father stood there. Time seemed to freeze. I looked at him, blood trickling down my chin, my cheek rapidly swelling. Victoria's hand raised in a fist, her other hand pinning me against the counter. The tableau was undeniable. There was no way to misunderstand this. This was assault. This was violence. Dad, I choked out. Dad, help me. Mark Torres looked at me. He looked at the blood on my lip. He looked at his wife, whose face was flushed with exertion and rage. He looked at the shattered glass visible through the open door where the family was waiting. He tightened his grip on his Scotch glass. His knuckles turned white. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Shame, maybe, or fear. I waited for him to step forward. I waited for him to roar, to defend his firstborn, to be the father he used to be before she came. Instead, he sighed. It was a long, weary sound, the sound of a man who had given up a long time ago. Victoria, enough, he said, his voice low and tired. You're making a scene. People are staring. He looked at me then, not with concern, but with annoyance. Fiona, just apologize to your mother, he said. Give her back whatever you took and let's finish dinner. Don't ruin Christmas for everyone. The world tilted on its axis. The pain in my cheek vanished, replaced by a cold, hollow sensation in the center of my chest. He wasn't stopping her because it was wrong. He was stopping her because it was loud, and he assumed I was guilty. He assumed I was the problem. I didn't take anything, I said, my voice barely audible. She's hurting me, Dad. I'm going back to the guests, Mark said, turning his back on me. Sort this out, quietly. The door swung shut behind him. Victoria looked at the closed door, then back at me. A slow, terrifying smile spread across her face. She knew. She had won. The last line of defense had just walked away. See? She whispered. Nobody cares. Fiona, you are alone. She shoved me one last time, hard enough that I slid down the cabinets and collapsed onto the cold tile floor. I sat there, legs sprawled, looking up at her. Get out, she said. Get out of my house. If you are not gone in 5 minutes, I will call the sheriff and tell them you assaulted me. She turned and walked out, smoothing her red dress, adjusting her hair. The door swung open and shut, letting in a burst of laughter and Jingle Bell Rock, before sealing me back in the silence of the kitchen. I sat on the floor. The smell of the roasting chicken was nauseating. The blood from my nose had dripped onto my white blouse. I felt broken, not just physically, but fundamentally. The father I had tried to please for 2 decades had just walked away and left me to bleed. I tried to stand, but my legs were shaking too hard. Then, the pantry door, a small, narrow closet near the fridge where we kept the brooms, creaked open. I froze. I hadn't realized anyone else was in the room. My younger sister, Tessa, stepped out. She was 16, gangly and awkward, holding a platter of untouched cookies she must have been hiding with. Her eyes were wide, rimmed with red, swimming with tears. She was the daughter of Mark and Victoria, the golden child's sister, the one who was supposed to be on their side. She looked at me, then at the door where our parents had gone. She didn't say a word. She walked past me, pretending to head for the sink, but as she passed, she stumbled, intentionally, and dropped to one knee beside me. For a second, her face was inches from mine. I could smell the peppermint candy on her breath. Don't say anything, she whispered, her voice trembling so much it was barely a sound. I recorded it, all of it, from the crack in the door. She shoved a napkin into my hand to wipe the blood, then stood up abruptly before I could respond. I hate you, she shouted loudly, for the benefit of anyone listening outside. "Just go away, Fiona." She ran out of the kitchen, sobbing loudly, playing her part perfectly. I sat there for another 10 seconds, clutching the napkin. The realization hit me slowly. Tessa, quiet, observant Tessa. She hadn't just watched. She had gathered ammunition. I pulled myself up using the handle of the oven. Every muscle ached. I grabbed my coat from the hook by the back door. I didn't go back into the living room for my purse. I didn't get my car keys. I just grabbed my thin wool coat and opened the back door. The wind hit me like a physical blow. It was 10 degrees below zero, and the snow was falling in thick, heavy sheets. I stepped out onto the porch, the snow crunching under my dress shoes. I tasted the blood on my lip again, cold and metallic. I walked down the driveway, away from the warm glow of the windows, away from the laughter, away from the father who chose silence. I had nothing but the clothes on my back and the knowledge that somewhere, on a cheap teenage smartphone, the truth was waiting. I didn't know then that the recording would be my salvation. I didn't know it would be the weapon that would one day burn this entire kingdom to the ground. All I knew was that I was walking into the dark, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking back. As I walked away from the house that night, shivering in a coat that was far too thin for an Ohio winter, my mind did not go to the future. It did not calculate where I would sleep or how I would eat. Instead, the biting cold pulled me backward, dragging me down into the deep, silted waters of memory, back to the time before the silence took over my father. There was a time when Mark Torres was not a man who stared at televisions to avoid his life. When I was very young, after my biological mother passed away from a sudden illness that left our house quiet and dusty, my father became my entire world. We were a team of two, operating in a chaotic but loving ecosystem of takeout boxes and spare parts. He was an electrician by trade, a man who understood how current flowed from one point to another, how to bridge a gap, how to fix a broken connection. Our weekends were spent in the garage. I remember the smell of it vividly, a mixture of cold concrete, metallic solder, and the old space heater that hummed in the corner. He would sit me on a high stool, my legs dangling nowhere near the floor, and place a circuit board in front of me. "Look, Fiona," he would say, his large hand guiding my small one holding the soldering iron. "It looks like a mess, but it is a map. The electricity has to know where to go. If the path is broken, the light won't turn on. We just have to build the road." He taught me patience. He taught me that broken things were not garbage. They were just puzzles waiting to be solved. We fixed toasters, rewired old lamps, and once, we spent 3 weeks rebuilding a radio from the 1950s so we could listen to the baseball game. In those years, I was not just his daughter, I was his apprentice. I was important. But chaos, my father decided, was not sustainable. He was lonely, and he was drowning in the administrative tasks of single parenthood, the bills, the taxes, the scheduling. That was how Victoria entered our lives. She did not arrive as a wicked stepmother from a fairy tale. She arrived as a solution. Victoria was a loan officer and financial manager at the local bank where my father was trying to refinance our mortgage. She was sharp, organized, and smelled of expensive vanilla perfume and starch. She looked at our messy, circuit board-filled lives and saw a project that needed management. My father fell in love with her competence. He mistook her controlling nature for stability. He told me, with a hopeful shine in his eyes, that Victoria was going to help us get back on track. They married when I was 10, and slowly, methodically, the map of my life was redrawn. It started with the house. Victoria decided that the garage was too cluttered, so the electronics were packed into boxes and shoved into the attic. The space was renovated into a home gym that nobody used. The soldering iron was replaced by throw pillows that we were not allowed to touch. Then came Brielle. Victoria had a daughter from a previous marriage, a girl 2 years younger than me. Brielle was everything I was not. She was loud, demanding, and possessed a natural talent for being the center of gravity in any room. When they moved in, Victoria explained the new logistics of the household. Brielle needs the larger bedroom facing the street, Victoria told my father over dinner, cutting her steak with precise, surgical strokes. She's very sensitive to light. Mark, she needs the morning sun for her circadian rhythms. Fiona is such a practical girl. She won't mind the room by the back stairs. It is quieter. My father looked at me. I waited for him to say that I loved the morning sun too, that the front room had been mine since I was a baby. But he just smiled, that weak, grateful smile he had started wearing. Fiona is adaptable, he said. She's a tough kid. That was the first time I realized that my resilience was being used as a weapon against me, because I could handle less. I was given less. The shift was subtle, a slow erosion of my status. I went from being the only daughter to being the older sister, which in Victoria's dictionary meant unpaid assistant. It wasn't that they beat me or locked me in a closet. It was just that the resources of the family were reallocated, like a budget cut in a failing department. By the time I was 12, the difference was a physical weight in the house. I remember my 12th birthday clearly. I came home from school expecting, perhaps, a dinner out or a small gathering. Instead, I found Victoria in the kitchen, unboxing a plastic container of store-bought cupcakes. She hadn't even removed the bright orange discount sticker that read $4.99. "Happy birthday, sweetie," she said, not looking up from her phone. "We are a bit tight this week, so we are just doing a quiet night. Your dad is working late." 2 months later, for Brielle's 10th birthday, the backyard was transformed. Victoria hired a catering company. There was a bouncy castle. There was a professional photographer. When I asked my father about it, standing in the kitchen while he nervously drank a glass of water, he looked away. "Victoria wants Brielle to feel welcome. Fiona," he said, his voice pleading. "It is hard for her. Moving to a new town. Don't make it difficult. We have to be fair." Fair. That word became a ghost haunting the hallways. To my father, fair meant keeping Victoria happy. If Victoria was happy, the house was peaceful. If I was unhappy, I was quiet. Therefore, the path of least resistance was always to shortchange me. I became the ghost in the machine of the Torres family. While Brielle was encouraged to join dance, drama, and art classes, activities that required expensive fees and costumes, I was told that I needed to focus on my studies and help around the house. "Brielle has such a creative spirit," Victoria would say to the neighbors, draping an arm around her daughter. "She is going to be a star. We have to nurture that." And me? I was the one who knew how to fix the Wi-Fi router when it crashed. I was the one who knew how to unclog the sink. I was the one who folded the laundry because Brielle is in a creative flow right now. "Fiona, don't disturb her with chores." The most painful part was watching my father fade. The man who taught me to build radios disappeared. He stopped going to the garage. He stopped asking me about my day. He became an echo of his wife. If Victoria said I was being difficult, he believed I was difficult. If Victoria said I didn't need new clothes for school because I didn't care about fashion anyway, he agreed. "You are so low maintenance, kiddo," he would say, patting my shoulder awkwardly. "I appreciate that." He didn't see that he was praising me for disappearing. Then, Tessa was born. I was 14 when Victoria gave birth to their shared child. I expected to hate her. I expected another Brielle, another golden idol to worship. But Tessa was different. She was a quiet, watchful baby with large, dark eyes that seemed to see too much. Because Victoria was busy managing Brielle's budding social life, and my father was working overtime to pay for it all. The job of raising Tessa often fell to me. I changed her diapers. I fed her bottles. I rocked her to sleep when she had colic. As she grew, Tessa became the only person in the house who saw me. When I was 16, I needed a laptop for high school. My old desktop, a dinosaur I had salvaged from a neighbor's trash, had finally died. I needed it for my science projects, for the complex mapping software I was starting to experiment with. "We can't afford a new laptop right now," Victoria said, closing the family ledger. "Maybe you can use the library computers. It builds character." A week later, Brielle, who was failing math but excelled at posting selfies, received a brand new, top-of-the-line laptop. She needs it for her fashion blog, Victoria explained, daring me to argue. It is an investment in her career. I didn't argue. I just went to my room. Late that night, my door creaked open. Tessa, only 4 years old then, toddled in. She was holding a plastic bag. Inside was a smashed granola bar and a juice box she had saved from her preschool lunch. "For you," she whispered, climbing onto my bed. "Mommy is mean." I hugged her, burying my face in her soft hair so she wouldn't feel me crying. That was the night I realized I wasn't entirely alone, but I was also the only shield she had. I learned to survive by turning inward. I stopped looking for validation from my father. I stopped trying to compete with Brielle. Instead, I turned back to the logic my father had taught me before he forgot himself. I became obsessed with systems. I loved maps. I loved logistics. I loved the idea that there was always an optimal way to get from point A to point B, a way to bypass the traffic, the roadwork, and the noise. While Brielle was practicing her runway walk in the living room, and Victoria was hosting dinner parties where she bragged about her talented daughter, I was in my small room by the back stairs, surrounded by graph paper. I mapped the local bus routes. I analyzed the traffic patterns of the town. I created efficient schedules for the household chores, calculating exactly how many minutes it took to vacuum the stairs versus washing the windows, just so I could minimize the time I spent in the common areas. I hid my intelligence. I learned that if I showed them I was smart, Victoria would see it as a threat to Brielle, and she would find a way to crush it. So I got straight A's in silence. I won the science fair. But I didn't tell them until the trophy was already in my closet, hidden behind my winter coat. My father never asked to see my report cards anymore. He just signed where I pointed, his eyes glazing over, his mind already on whatever task Victoria had assigned him. "Good job, kid," he would mumble, not reading the lines that said exceptional or gifted. I built a fortress of silence and geometry. I told myself that one day I would draw a line on a map that led out of Oak Ridge, and I would never look back. I didn't know that it would take a night of blood and snow to finally push me out the door, or that the little sister who brought me a smashed granola bar would be the one to hand me the key to my freedom. But back then, in the slow, suffocating years of my adolescence, I just waited, I watched, and like a good logistician, I took inventory of every slight, every unfairness, and every silence, storing them away in the warehouse of my memory. I didn't know yet what I would do with all of it. I just knew that nothing in a closed system ever truly disappears. It just builds pressure. The map was beautiful because it made sense. That was the only reason I fell in love with logistics in the first place. In a house where the rules changed depending on Victoria's mood, or where my father's affection was a variable that fluctuated with the stock market, a map was a constant. A road did not lie. A distance of 10 miles was always 10 miles, regardless of how much you wanted it to be 5. By my junior year of high school, I had stopped trying to be the daughter they wanted and started trying to be the architect of my own escape. I spent my evenings hunched over my desk, not doing homework, but redrawing the public transit system of our county. I had noticed that the buses in Oak Ridge ran on a schedule that had not been updated since the 1990s, resulting in massive inefficiencies and wasted fuel. I gathered data for 3 months, tracking arrival times and passenger loads, and then I built a new model. I entered the project into the state science fair under the title Optimizing Rural Transit Interfaces, when I won first prize, standing on a stage in Columbus holding a blue ribbon and a certificate for $500. I felt a surge of power that was entirely new to me. I had looked at chaos, and I had fixed it. My physics teacher, Mr. Henderson, was the first adult in years to look at me with genuine respect. "You have a mind for supply chains. Fiona," he told me, tapping my project board. "You see the flow of things. You need to apply to Columbia Ridge University. They have one of the best logistics programs in the country. It is far, but it is where you belong." Columbia Ridge. The name alone sounded like a promise. It was 3 states away, nestled in the mountains, a place where nobody knew that my stepmother made me wear an apron to dinner or that my father was afraid of his own shadow. I applied in secret, using the library computers so Victoria wouldn't see the browser history. When the acceptance letter came in the spring, it felt heavy, like a gold bar. I opened it sitting on the curb down the street from our house, my hands shaking. They offered me a partial scholarship. It covered 60% of the tuition. It was generous, incredible even, but it left a gap. I did the math in my head immediately. I would need about $15,000 a year to cover the rest, plus room and board. I wasn't worried. I knew about the college fund. My mother, my real mother, had started it before she died. My father had contributed to it religiously in those early years, putting away a portion of his paycheck every month. For Fiona's future, he used to say, by my calculations, based on the statements I had glimpsed years ago before Victoria took over the filing, there should have been at least $30,000 in that account, enough to get me through the first 2 years while I found a job. That night at dinner, I decided to play my hand. The mood was relatively calm. Victoria was pleased because she had just redecorated the guest bathroom in a shade of eggshell that cost $40 a gallon. Brielle was picking at her salad, talking about her portfolio for fashion school. "I got into Columbia Ridge," I said. I didn't shout it. I just placed the letter on the center of the table, right next to the salt shaker. The silence that followed was not the stunned silence of pride. It was the awkward silence of a problem being introduced into a smooth-running system. My father looked up from his meatloaf, blinking. "Columbia Ridge? That's in Colorado, isn't it, Fiona?" "Yes," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. "They have the top logistics program in the tri-state area, and they gave me a scholarship. It covers 60%. "Logistics," Victoria said, tasting the word like it was spoiled milk. She picked up the letter with 2 fingers, as if it might stain her manicure. "That is for truck drivers and warehouse workers, isn't it? Why would you go all the way to Colorado to learn how to pack a box?" "It is supply chain management, Victoria," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "It is the backbone of the global economy, and I am good at it." "It is very far away," my father mumbled, looking at his wife for cues on how to react. "And out-of-state tuition is, well, it is steep, even with 60% off." "I have the fund," I said. "Mom's fund. That will cover the difference for the start. And I can work. I already looked up work-study programs." Victoria dropped the letter back onto the table. It slid into a pile of green beans. "We need to discuss this, Mark," she said, wiping her mouth with her napkin. "Not now, but we need to look at the numbers." The numbers discussion didn't happen for 3 days. Every time I brought it up, Victoria had a headache, or Brielle needed help with a crisis involving a hemline. I started to get a bad feeling, a cold prickle at the base of my neck that told me the map I was looking at did not match the terrain. On Friday, I cut school during my lunch period and walked to the bank. It was the same bank where Victoria worked, but she was in her office on the 2nd floor. I went to the teller counter, hoping to see Mrs. Gable, a kind woman who had known my father since high school. "Hi, Mrs. Gael," I said, trying to smile. "I just wanted to check the balance on the custodial account, the one under Mark Torres, for Fiona Torres." Mrs. Gable's smile faltered. She looked at her screen, then up at the ceiling, then back at me. She lowered her voice. "Oh, honey," she said, "I thought you knew." "Knew what?" I asked. The air in the bank suddenly felt very thin. "The account was closed out last Tuesday," she said gently. "Your father and Victoria came in. They transferred the balance." "Transferred it where?" I whispered. "To a new account," she said, "under Brielle's name, for an educational trust." I didn't faint. I didn't scream. I just stood there, gripping the cold marble of the counter until my knuckles turned white. $30,000. My mother's life insurance money. My father's overtime pay from the days when he loved me. Gone. Moved across a spreadsheet column by the woman who hated me, with the signature of the man who was supposed to protect me. Thank you, I said. My voice sounded like it was coming from a radio in another room. I must have misunderstood. I walked out of the bank. I walked 5 miles home. I didn't feel the pavement under my feet. I felt only the burning, absolute clarity of betrayal. When I got home, they were in the living room. Brielle was looking at a brochure for a fashion institute in New York City that cost $50,000 a year just for tuition. Victoria was beaming. My father was pouring a drink. I walked in and threw my backpack on the floor. The sound made them all jump. You stole it, I said. I looked directly at my father. I didn't look at Victoria. I wanted him to look at me. I wanted him to see me. Fiona, don't start, Victoria warned, standing up. We are having a celebration. You emptied my college fund, I said, my voice rising, cracking. $30,000. You gave it to her, I pointed at Brielle, who looked more annoyed than guilty. It wasn't your fund, Fiona, Victoria said coolly. It was a family savings account, and as the financial manager of this family, I have to allocate resources where they will yield the highest return. Return? I choked out a laugh. I am the one with the scholarship. I am the one with the state science award. She failed algebra twice. Brielle has an artistic gift, Victoria snapped. Fashion is a brutal industry. You have to pay to play. She needs to be in New York. She needs the best equipment. That money is an investment in a star. And what am I? I asked. I turned to my father. Dad, you saved that money for me. Mom wanted that for me. How could you sign it away? My father looked at the ice in his glass. He swirled it, round and round, a tiny, trapped hurricane. Victoria thinks, well, she made some good points. Fee, he mumbled. You are smart. You are resourceful. You've always been the tough one. Brielle, she needs more help. She's not like you. So because I'm capable, I get nothing? I asked. Because I actually tried, I get punished? It is a lesson in maturity, Victoria interjected. Stepping between me and my father, she crossed her arms, a wall of silk and judgment. The world doesn't hand you things just because you think you deserve them. Fiona, if you want to go to that school in the middle of nowhere, figure it out. Get another job. Apply for loans. Prove you want it. Don't stand here and beg for your sister's future. Her future? I screamed. It was my money. It was Mark's money, Victoria corrected. And Mark agrees with me. Don't you, Mark? We both looked at him. The silence stretched, long and agonizing. It's better this way. Fiona, he said softly, still not looking up. You'll figure it out. You always do. That was the moment the last cable snapped. The bridge collapsed. I looked at him and realized that he wasn't just weak. He was an accomplice. He had sold my future to buy himself peace and quiet. I will figure it out, I said. My voice was suddenly very calm. It scared me how calm it was. And I will never ask you for a single penny again. But remember this, Dad, when you are old, and she has spent every dime you have, don't call me. I turned and walked out of the room. I didn't know that halfway up the stairs, pressed into the shadows of the landing, sat Tessa. She was 7 years old now. She was holding an old, cracked iPod Touch that Brielle had thrown away a year ago. She had fished it out of the trash and found a charger for it. She was sitting there, hugging her knees, with the voice memo app open. The little red line was pulsing, recording the silence that followed my exit. She had heard everything, the theft, the justification, the cowardice. I went to my room and pulled out my map of the bus routes. I took a red marker and drew a thick, angry line from Oak Ridge to the state border. The next day, I went to the diner in town and asked for extra shifts. I went to the library and applied for 5 more grants. I applied for a student loan that I would be paying off until I was 30. I did it all with a cold, mechanical efficiency. I stopped eating dinner with them. I stopped talking about my day. I became a ghost in the house again. But this time, I was a haunting. I worked, I saved, I studied. I looked at the deficit, the $30,000, not as a tragedy, but as a debt they owed me. a debt that was accruing interest. Victoria thought she had taught me a lesson about maturity. She was right. She taught me that in the logistics of the Torres family, I was an expenditure to be cut, and the only way to survive a hostile takeover is to build your own company from the ground up. The acceptance letter to Columbia Ridge was still on my desk, wrinkled where I had clenched it. I smoothed it out. I would go if I had to crawl, and I would leave them behind in their perfect, debt-ridden, morally bankrupt house. But I didn't know about the recording. I didn't know that my 7-year-old sister had saved that file under a folder named Why Fiona Left. I just thought I was alone. I was wrong about that, too. I came back because of 7 words. They were glowing on the screen of my phone. A text message from my father received 3 days before Christmas. Please come home, Fee. Things are different. I sat in my dorm room, surrounded by packing boxes, staring at those words. I was 22 years old. I had just graduated summa cum laude from Columbia Ridge University. I had a degree in supply chain management, a job offer from a mid-sized logistics firm in Denver starting in January, and a bank account that was finally, after 4 years of scraping and starving, in the black. I did not need them. I did not need Oak Ridge. I did not need the house with the perfectly manicured lawn and the rot at its foundation. But the child inside me, the little girl who used to solder radios in the garage, was not dead. She was just dormant. And she read, "Things are different as I am different. I am ready to be your father again." So I drove. I drove 10 hours through a snowstorm, my trunk filled with my meager possessions and a carefully wrapped gift for everyone. I bought my father a vintage set of screwdrivers, the kind with the wooden handles he used to love. I bought Tessa a sketchbook and a set of professional charcoal pencils. I even bought Victoria a silk scarf and Brielle a gift card to an art supply store. I wanted to be the bigger person. I wanted to walk through that door not as the victim, but as the success story. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked like a magazine spread. The lights were tasteful white LEDs, draped over the hedges with mathematical precision. I took a deep breath, checked my lipstick in the rearview mirror, and told myself, "You are a logistics manager. You handle crises for a living. You can handle dinner." I was wrong. The moment I stepped inside, the warmth of the hallway hit me, smelling of cinnamon and expensive perfume. My father was the first to see me. He looked older, his hair thinner, his shoulders slightly more stooped. "Fi," he said, smiling. It was a genuine smile, weak but real. He hugged me. "You made it." "Hi, Dad," I said, hugging him back, smelling the scotch on his breath, even though it was only 4 in the afternoon. "I brought my diploma. I thought you might want to see it." Of course, he mumbled, pulling away too quickly as Victoria entered the foyer. Victoria looked ageless. She was wearing a dress the color of crushed velvet, her hair swept up in a chignon that looked like it could withstand a hurricane. "Fiona," she said, no hug, just a nod. "Wipe your feet. The carpet was just steam cleaned." "Merry Christmas, Victoria," I said, wiping my boots on the mat until I was sure not a speck of dust remained. The living room was full. My aunts, uncles, and cousins were gathered around the fireplace. Brielle was holding court in the center of the room. She looked stunning, I had to admit, in a silver dress that probably cost more than my entire semester of books. "And this is the fabric I sourced from Italy," Brielle was saying, holding up a swatch of cloth. "For my spring collection." "Incredible," Aunt Sarah cooed. "You are so talented, Brielle." When I walked in, the conversation paused. "Oh, look who is back," Victoria announced, her voice pitching up into that fake hostess register. "Fiona made the drive. We weren't sure if her old car would make it." "It made it fine," I said, keeping my smile fixed. "Hi, everyone." "Fiona just finished school," Victoria continued, placing a hand on Brielle's shoulder. "Brielle, tell them about the studio space you just looked at in the Arts District. It is huge, right?" "It is 3,000 square feet," Brielle said, barely glancing at me. "Mom says the lighting is perfect for my runway shows." That is wonderful, Aunt Sarah said. Then she looked at me. And what about you, Fiona? What did you study again? Something with computers? I straightened my spine. Supply chain management and logistics, I said clearly. I graduated with highest honors, summa cum laude. Oh, Aunt Sarah said, her eyes glazing over. That sounds complicated. She works with trucks, Victoria interjected, laughing lightly. She figures out how to move boxes from one warehouse to another. It is very practical. We need practical people, don't we? Otherwise, how would Brielle get her fabrics? The room chuckled. In 2 sentences, she had reduced my 4 years of sleepless nights, complex algorithms, and statistical analysis into the role of a delivery driver for her daughter's genius. I looked at my father. He was staring into his glass. He did not correct her. He did not say, "She graduated top of her class." He just took a sip. I swallowed the lump in my throat and went to find Tessa. My little sister was sitting in the corner, almost hidden behind the massive Christmas tree. She was 10 years old now, lanky and quiet. When she saw me, her eyes lit up, but she didn't run to me. She glanced at Victoria first, checking the threat level, before giving me a quick, fierce hug. "I missed you," she whispered. "I missed you too." I whispered back. "I have a present for you. Later." The evening wore on, a slow erosion of my dignity. Victoria asked me to help in the kitchen, then kept me there for an hour arranging appetizers while the rest of the family opened gifts. I became invisible, a ghost in an apron. Then came the performance. Victoria gathered everyone around the tree. "Mark has outdone himself this year," she announced, her voice trembling with feigned emotion. "I have to show you all." She opened a velvet box. Inside lay a diamond necklace. It was a teardrop pendant, surrounded by smaller stones, suspended on a platinum chain. It caught the lights of the tree and shattered them into 1,000 rainbows. "Oh, Victoria," the aunts gasped in unison. "It is stunning," Victoria said, fastening it around her neck. "Mark, honey, you shouldn't have. It is too much." My father smiled, that vague, disconnected smile. "You deserve it," he said. I knew that necklace. I knew the brand. It cost at least $5,000. I stood by the kitchen door, wiping my hands on a towel, thinking about the $30,000 taken from my college fund. "Things are different," he had said. They certainly were. They had more money to waste. 20 minutes later, the chaos began. Victoria had taken the necklace off to show Aunt Sarah the clasp detail, setting it down on the side table next to the eggnog bowl. I was clearing empty glasses, moving through the crowd, trying to be efficient so I could leave early. "Where is it?" Victoria's voice cut through the room like a knife. "Where is what, Mom?" Brielle asked, looking up from her phone. "The necklace," Victoria said. "I put it right here, on the coaster. It is gone." The music seemed to stop. The laughter died. Everyone looked at the small, empty wooden coaster. "Maybe it fell," Uncle Jerry suggested. Everyone started looking. We checked the floor. We moved the cushions. We looked under the tree. Nothing. Victoria stood in the center of the rug, her chest heaving. Her eyes were not searching the floor anymore. They were scanning the faces. They landed on me. I was standing near the hallway, holding a tray of dirty napkins and half-eaten cookies. I had a smear of flour on my sleeve from the rolls Victoria had made me heat up earlier. "Fiona," she said. "I haven't seen it," I said immediately. "I was clearing the table." "You were standing right there," Victoria said, pointing a manicured finger at the side table. "When I showed Sarah the clasp, you were right behind us." "I was picking up Uncle Jerry's glass," I said. "You have a lot of loans, don't you?" Victoria said. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the silence of the room, it sounded like a scream. "Student loans are expensive, and rent in the city. It must be hard starting out." "Mom," Brielle said, her eyes widening with delight. "You don't think—" "I didn't take your necklace," I said, my voice shaking. "Check the tray. Check my pockets. We aren't going to do this here," Victoria said, her face composing itself into a mask of pained matriarchal duty. "We are not going to humiliate the family, Fiona. Come into the kitchen. We will discuss this privately." "I am not going anywhere with you," I said. "If you think I stole it, call the police. Let them search me." "Don't you dare mention the police in this house on Christmas," my father snapped. I looked at him, shocked. It was the first time he had spoken directly to me in an hour. "Dad, she is accusing me of theft," I said. "Just go in the kitchen, Fiona," he said, rubbing his temples. "Sort it out, please." Victoria walked to the kitchen door and held it open. Her expression was calm, expectant. I looked around the room. My aunts looked at the floor. My cousins looked at their phones. Nobody spoke. I was the outsider, the suspect, the stain on the picture. I walked into the kitchen. Victoria followed me and closed the door. She didn't just close it. She leaned her back against it, sealing us in. The change in her was instantaneous. The pained mother vanished. The predator appeared. "Give it to me," she hissed. "I don't have it," I said, putting the tray down on the counter with a clatter. "I am not a thief, Victoria. I make my own money now. I don't need yours." "You are a liar," she said, stepping closer. "You are a jealous, ungrateful leech. You couldn't stand seeing Brielle shine tonight, could you? You couldn't stand seeing Mark spend money on me." "I don't care about your money," I said. "I care that you treat me like garbage in my own home." "This isn't your home," she spat. "It hasn't been your home for 4 years. You are a guest, and a bad one." "Then I'll leave," I said, reaching for my purse on the counter. She moved faster than I expected. She grabbed my wrist, her nails digging into my skin. "You are not leaving with that diamond," she said. "Let go of me," I warned her. "I am not 12 anymore. Victoria, I am 22. If you touch me, I will defend myself." "Defend yourself?" She laughed. "Who is going to believe you? The girl who stole her stepmother's jewelry? You are nobody. Fiona?" She shoved me. It wasn't a playful shove. It was a full-body check. I stumbled back, my hip hitting the drawer handles. The pain was sharp, immediate. "Don't touch me," I yelled. She slapped me. It was the same slap from the summary of my life. Hard, humiliating, stinging. It caught me on the jaw. My head snapped to the side. I tasted blood. I stood there, stunned. The physical pain was eclipsed by the sheer shock of it. I was a professional. I managed supply chains for a tri-state area. I was an adult woman, and I was being slapped in a kitchen while jingle bells played in the other room. "Where is it?" she screamed, grabbing my hair. She yanked my head down. "Check her pockets. Strip her if you have to." She was talking to herself, or maybe to the demon on her shoulder. She was clawing at my coat, trying to rip it open. "Get off me!" I shouted, pushing her back. She stumbled but didn't fall. Then the door opened. We both froze. My father stood there. He looked at the scene. He saw his wife, hair slightly disheveled, face red with rage. He saw me, clutching my cheek, blood on my lip, my coat torn. He saw the violence hanging in the air like smoke. "Mark," Victoria said, breathless, immediately shifting into victim mode. She pushed me. I tried to get the necklace and she attacked me." I looked at my father. "She hit me. Dad, she slapped me in the face. Look at my lip." My father looked at the blood. He looked at my eyes. I saw the recognition in his face. He knew. He knew Victoria. He knew me. He knew exactly what had happened. I waited. This was it. This was the moment. "Things are different," he had said. He let out a long, heavy sigh. He walked over to the counter and poured himself another drink from the bottle of wine sitting there. "Victoria, stop it," he said wearily. "You are making too much noise." He turned to me. "Fiona," he said, "just apologize to your mother. Give her the damn necklace back if you have it. Or just say you are sorry for the misunderstanding. Don't ruin Christmas." The words hit me harder than the slap. Don't ruin Christmas. He wasn't protecting me. He was managing the noise level. He was negotiating a ceasefire in a war where I was the only casualty. He didn't care that I was bleeding. He cared that the guests might hear the screaming. "I didn't take it," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Dad, she hit me." "I don't want to hear it," he said, turning his back on me to face the living room door. "Fix this, Victoria. Just quiet down." He walked out. He left me in the cage with the tiger. Victoria smiled. It was a terrifying, triumphant smile. She knew she had absolute immunity. She grabbed me by the shoulders and slammed me against the cabinets one last time, the impact knocking the wind out of me. I slid down to the floor, gasping. "Get out," she hissed. "Get out before I call the cops and tell them you assaulted me." As I sat there on the cold tile, wiping the blood from my mouth, looking at the hem of her red dress swaying like a pendulum, I thought it was the end. I thought silence had won. I didn't see the pantry door ajar. I didn't see the faint glow of a screen in the crack between the door and the frame. I didn't know that Tessa had slipped in while we were arguing. I didn't know she was crouched behind the brooms, holding her phone with a steady hand. I didn't know that the camera lens had caught everything. The slap, the scream, and most importantly, the moment Mark Torres looked at his bleeding daughter and told her to be quiet. The recording was running, the file size was growing, and the evidence of their cruelty was being written in binary code, destined to outlive their lies. The snow was not poetic anymore. It was just cold. It was a physical weight pressing down on my shoulders as I walked down the long, winding driveway of my father's house, leaving footprints that I knew would be filled within an hour. I had a small suitcase that I had grabbed from the trunk of my car before they locked the doors, my laptop bag slung over my shoulder, and a coat that was stained with a single, dark drop of blood on the collar. I did not have a car. My father had bought the sedan I drove in college, and the title was in his name. I left the keys in the mailbox. It was a point of pride, perhaps a stupid one, but I would not take anything that they could claim I stole. I would not give Victoria the satisfaction of calling the police to report a stolen vehicle. I walked 3 miles to the nearest bus stop. The wind cut through my wool coat like it was made of paper. My phone buzzed with notifications, probably Brielle posting about the drama, or Victoria spinning the narrative to the relatives, but I turned it off. I did not want to hear their voices. The bus to Ridgeport was the last one of the night. It cost $12. I paid in cash, counting the bills with numb fingers. The driver, a heavy-set man with tired eyes, looked at my bloodied lip and the red smear on my cheek, but he said nothing. In his line of work, he probably saw girls running away from bad Christmases every year. Ridgeport was not a city of lights. It was a city of industry, a sprawling grid of warehouses, distribution centers, and rail yards that served as the circulatory system for the state's economy. It smelled of diesel, wet cardboard, and cold asphalt. It was ugly, but to me, it looked like a puzzle I could solve. I spent that first night in the bus terminal. I curled up on a hard plastic bench, hugging my laptop bag to my chest. I did not sleep. I watched the schedule board flip over, watching the buses arrive and depart, calculating the turnaround times in my head to keep from crying. Bus 402 arrived at 3 in the morning. Depart at 3:45. That is a 45-minute layover. Inefficient. When the sun came up, painting the gray sky a slightly lighter shade of gray, I went to the bathroom, washed the dried blood off my face with gritty soap, and fixed my hair. I looked in the mirror. I looked tired, pale, and hollowed out, but I was still standing. "Okay, Fiona," I told my reflection. "Phase 1, revenue stream. Phase 2, shelter." I walked out of the station and headed toward the industrial district. Most people looking for quick work would go to the mall or the restaurants downtown. I went to where the trucks were. I knew that logistics hubs were always desperate for labor, even if it was just sweeping floors. I walked for 4 hours. I was rejected by 3 staffing agencies because I didn't have a permanent address. I was turned away from a warehouse because I didn't have steel-toed boots. By noon, my stomach was cramping with hunger, and my feet were blistered. I ended up at a place called Miles' Diner. It was a truck stop right off the main highway. A low building with a neon sign that buzzed loudly and a parking lot filled with 18-wheelers. It smelled of frying bacon and old coffee. I walked in and asked to see the manager, a woman named Sheila, who looked like she had wrestled a bear and won, looked me up and down. "I need a job," I said. "I will do anything. I will wash dishes. I will scrub the toilets. I just need a shift today." Sheila looked at my college girl coat and my polite demeanor. "You ever wash dishes in a commercial kitchen? Honey, it isn't like doing them at home." "I learn fast," I said, "and I don't complain." "$7.50 an hour," she said. "Cash at the end of the shift. You start now." I spent the next 8 hours in the back, elbow deep in scalding water, scraping half-eaten burgers and congealed gravy off plates. The steam ruined my hair. The soap stung the cut on my lip. My back screamed in protest, but I worked with a rhythmic, mechanical focus. I organized the dishes by size and type before washing them to minimize movement. I created a system. It was the only way to keep my brain from replaying the loop of Victoria slapping me. By 8 that evening, the diner was packed with drivers stopping for the night. I was on a break, sitting at the counter with a free cup of coffee and a stale donut Sheila had given me. Next to me sat a man who looked like part of the furniture. He was wearing a faded hat with a trucking company logo, and he had a stack of crumpled invoices and a map spread out on the counter. He was muttering to himself, tracing a line on the map with a thick, calloused finger. "Stupid dispatch," he grumbled, taking a bite of his burger. "Sending me through the gorge in December? It is going to take 3 hours just to clear the pass." I looked at his map. I couldn't help it. It was a reflex. "You are going to Cincinnati?" I asked. He looked at me, surprised that the dishwasher was speaking to him. "Yeah, and dispatch has me running Route 7. Says it is the shortest mileage." "It is the shortest mileage," I said, putting my coffee down. "But the grade on the Gorge Road is 6%. With a full load and the snow forecast, you will be crawling at 20 miles per hour. Plus, they are doing construction on the bridge near Sector 4. He frowned. "How do you know that?" "I listened to the traffic reports," I lied. I didn't tell him I had memorized the state's infrastructure grid for my senior thesis. If you take the bypass on Highway 9, it adds 12 miles to the trip, but the road is flat, and they plow it every hour. You will maintain an average speed of 55. You will save 45 minutes, minimum, and less fuel because you aren't fighting the incline. I pulled a napkin from the dispenser and grabbed a pen from his pile. I drew a quick schematic. "Here," I said, sketching the intersection. "Cut across here. Avoid the gorge." The man, whose name I learned was Eddie Morales, looked at the napkin, then he looked at his map, then he looked at me. "You sure about the construction on the bridge?" he asked. "Positive," I said. "Lane closure started yesterday at 8 in the morning." He folded the napkin and put it in his pocket. "If you are right, kid, I owe you a pie." He came back 3 days later. I was scrubbing a pot when Sheila yelled that someone wanted to see me. Eddie was standing there, grinning. 50 minutes, he said. "I saved 50 minutes and about 10 gallons of diesel. Dispatch didn't even know the bridge was closed until noon." He put a $10 bill in the tip jar. Then he leaned in. "What are you doing back here washing dishes?" he asked. "You got a computer in your head or something?" "I need the money," I said, wiping my hands on my apron. "My boss," Eddie said. "He runs a small outfit called Atlas Line Carriers. He is a good guy, but his dispatcher just quit, and he is drowning in paperwork. The office is a mess. The routes are a mess. We are losing money on gas because nobody is doing the math." He handed me a business card. It was bent at the corner. "Go see him," Eddie said. "Tell him Eddie sent the girl who knows about the bridge." The next morning, I walked 2 miles to the Atlas Line Carrier's office. It was a small, prefabricated building in the middle of a lot filled with gravel and shipping containers. Inside, it looked like a bomb had gone off in a paper factory. Files were stacked on the floor. The phones were ringing. A harried-looking man with thinning hair was shouting into a headset about a missing shipment of frozen chicken. I waited until he hung up. "I am Fiona," I said. "Eddie sent me." The man, Mr. Henderson, no relation to my teacher, looked at me skeptically. "You are the one who rerouted him? You look like you should be in school." "I have a degree in supply chain management," I said, "and I need a job. I can organize this." I gestured to the chaos of his desk. "I can't pay much," he sighed, rubbing his eyes. $12 an hour, temporary, just until I find a real dispatcher. 50, I countered, "and I will double your on-time delivery rate in 2 weeks." He laughed, a dry barking sound. "You got guts, kid. Okay, 14. But you start right now. That pile there? That is the nightmare for the Midwest route. Fix it." I sat down at a desk that wobbly, brushed off the crumbs from someone's lunch, and opened my laptop. It was not glamorous. It was data entry. It was staring at spreadsheets until my eyes burned. But as I started inputting the destinations, the weights, the driver schedules, the pattern emerged. I saw the inefficiencies like glowing red lines, 2 trucks going to the same city half empty, one driver sitting idle for 4 hours, while another was pushed into overtime. I started moving the pieces. I built a master spreadsheet with color codes for urgency and weather conditions. I consolidated shipments. By the end of the first week, the drivers were happier. They were getting home earlier. By the end of the second week, Mr. Henderson came to my desk holding a fuel report. "We are down 8% on fuel costs," he said, looking at the paper as if it were a holy text. "How did you do that?" "I optimized the winter routes," I said, not looking up from my screen. "I factored in the wind patterns and the elevation changes. Heavy trucks go on the flat routes, lighter trucks take the hills." He looked at me for a long time. "You can stay," he said, "and I am bumping you to 16 an hour." It wasn't a fortune. It was barely enough to rent a tiny studio apartment above a garage in a neighborhood where the police sirens were a nightly lullaby. But it was mine. I bought a mattress from a thrift store. I bought a kettle. I bought a lock for my door. Every night, I came home to that empty room, and the silence was heavy. I missed Tessa. I missed the idea of a family, even if the reality had been a lie. Then, about 3 weeks after Christmas, my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. I opened the message. It was a grainy photo of the Christmas tree at my father's house, taken from a low angle, maybe from under a table. Then came the text. "I got a burner phone from a friend at school. Don't reply to this number after tonight. I just wanted you to know, that night, I recorded it. I have the video. I saved it on this phone, on a USB stick I hid in my vent, and I emailed it to a fake account I made." My heart hammered against my ribs. I sat down on my mattress, staring at the screen. A second text came through. "Mom told everyone you had a mental breakdown. She said you attacked her and ran away on drugs. Dad just nods when she says it. I hate them. I have the proof. Should I post it?" I held the phone, my thumbs hovering over the keys. I closed my eyes and imagined it. The video going viral. Victoria's reputation ruined. My father's shame exposed. It would be explosive. It would be justice. But then I looked around my room. I looked at the spreadsheet on my laptop screen. The work I was doing. I was just starting to build a foundation. If that video came out now, I would be dragged back into their orbit. I would be the girl from that video. I would be a victim again. Victoria would spin it. She would hire lawyers. She would say I edited it. I wasn't ready. I didn't have the resources to fight a war. I needed high ground first. I typed back. "No, not yet. Keep it safe. Don't tell anyone you have it. Act normal. Study hard. Wait for my signal. I am building something. When we use it, we are going to use it to end them completely. Not just embarrass them." The reply came a minute later. "Okay, I trust you. Come back for me one day." "I promise," I typed. I deleted the thread, then turned off the phone. I went to the window and looked out at the snowy street, at the trucks rumbling by on the highway. I touched the glass. It was cold, But my hand was warm. I had a job, I had a plan, and now I knew I had a weapon buried in a heating vent in Oak Ridge. I wasn't the girl crying in the snow anymore. I was a strategist biding her time. The next day, at the office, a driver named Big Sal came in. He was a giant of a man who usually never spoke. He slammed a piece of paper on my desk. "You the one who changed my route to pass through Lincoln instead of the interstate?" He grunted. "Yes," I said, bracing myself for a complaint. "The wind shear on the interstate is dangerous for your load height today." "I got home in time to see my kids' basketball game," he said. He looked down at me, his face softening. "First time in 2 years. Thanks." He walked away. I looked at the map on my screen. The little blue dots representing the trucks were moving in perfect synchronization. I zoomed out, looking at the whole state, then the region. "I can do this," I whispered. "I can fix this whole system." I didn't know it then, but root sphere dynamics was being born right there, on a scratched desk in a shipping container office, and every mile I saved, every dollar I earned, was another brick in the wall I was building to keep Victoria and Mark out, until I was ready to let the truth in. Winter in the logistics world is not a season. It is a diagnosis. It is a 3-month sickness where schedules go to die, margins evaporate into the slush, and grown men scream into their radios because a patch of black ice in Nebraska has just cost them $2,000 in late fees. At Atlas Line Carriers, winter was usually the time when Mr. Henderson stopped trying to make a profit and started praying just to break even. The whiteboard in the office, usually organized by neat rows of destinations and drivers, became a chaotic smear of red marker. Delayed, stuck, and canceled were scrawled across the board so often that the red ink stained the plastic permanently. I sat in the corner, wrapped in a thick cardigan I had bought for $5 at a thrift store, watching the panic. My job was officially data entry, taking the scribbled notes from the dispatchers and typing them into the antiquated system. But my brain refused to work that way. My brain saw the chaos and instinctively wanted to tidy it up. I started with a spreadsheet. It was innocent at first, just a way to save myself the headache of decoding Henderson's handwriting. But then, I started adding columns. I added a column for historical weather data, pulling information from public archives about which highways iced over first when the temperature dropped below 20 degrees. I added a column for driver preference, noting which guys were comfortable with mountain passes and which ones slowed down to a crawl at the first sight of a snowflake. I added a formula that calculated the real-time cost of idling versus the cost of a 50-mile detour. By mid-January, my little spreadsheet had mutated into a monster. It was ugly, a sprawling grid of macros and conditional formatting that made my old laptop's fans scream like a jet engine. But it was alive. It pulsed with data. "Eddie," I said one morning, catching him as he poured his 4th cup of coffee, "you are heading to Des Moines today?" "Yeah," he grunted, rubbing his tired eyes. "Forecast says heavy snow. I am going to be stuck on Interstate 80 for 6 hours. I can feel it." "Don't take 80, I said, turning my screen toward him. "Look at this." I pointed to a line of green cells on my sheet. "The wind is coming from the north," I explained. 80 is an east-west wind tunnel. It will be drifting shut by noon. But if you drop south to Highway 34, the tree line blocks the wind. It is a 2-lane road, so the speed limit is lower. But the average moving speed right now is 45 miles per hour. On 80, the average speed is 6. Eddie looked at the screen, then at me. He looked at the window where the snow was already falling sideways. "Highway 34 adds 40 miles, he said. "It saves you 3 hours of idling," I countered, "and you won't slide into a ditch." Eddie took the route. He arrived in Des Moines 4 hours ahead of the competition. He called the office when he unloaded, his voice cracking with disbelief. "The road was clear," he told Henderson on the speakerphone. I don't know how she knew, but the road was clear. That was the first crack in the dam. Within a week, the other drivers were hovering around my desk before their shifts, asking for the Fiona route, They brought me coffees, chocolate bars, and once, a pair of warm wool socks, because they noticed my boots were leaking. They didn't care about the algorithms. They just knew that if they listened to me, they got home to their families instead of sleeping in their cabs on the side of a highway. But the real test came in February. The news called it a bomb cyclone. The meteorologists were using words like historic and life-threatening. The entire Midwest was about to be buried under 2 feet of snow in 24 hours. At Atlas Line, the mood was funeral. We had a contract with Freshmart, a regional grocery chain. We were supposed to deliver fresh produce and dairy to their 20 stores before the storm hit. If we failed, the shelves would be empty right when panic buying started. The penalties in the contract were brutal, enough to bankrupt a small company like Atlas Line. "We have to cancel," Henderson said, head in his hands. "We can't send the trucks out. The interstate is closing in 2 hours. We are going to lose the contract, but I can't risk the rigs." The phone was ringing. It was the logistics manager from Freshmart, screaming about lawsuits. I looked at my laptop. I had been building a model for this exact scenario for 3 nights, running simulations while eating instant noodles in my freezing apartment. "Mr. Henderson," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise of the office. "Don't cancel." He looked up, eyes bloodshot. "Fiona, look outside. The world is ending." "The interstates are closing," I said, standing up and walking to the big wall map. "But the secondary agricultural roads are still open. The farmers plow them themselves to get to their livestock. They are narrow, and they are slow, but they are moving." I grabbed a red marker. "We split the loads," I said, drawing lines rapidly. "We don't use the big 18-wheelers. We can't turn them on those tight roads. We rent 6 box trucks from the rental place down the street. They are sitting there unused because everyone is scared. We transfer the perishable cargo. We run a spiderweb pattern, not a straight line. We hit the distribution center from the back roads." "Rent more trucks?" Henderson asked, looking at me like I was insane. "That will cost us $2,000. "The penalty for missing the delivery is $50,000, I said. "And you lose the client forever. The rental is 4% of the loss. Do the math." Henderson stared at the map. He stared at me. He saw a 23-year-old girl in a thrift store sweater, but for the first time, I think he saw the steel spine underneath. "Do it," he whispered. "You have authorization. Run the floor." I didn't sleep for 36 hours. I turned the Atlas Line office into a war room. I had 3 monitors going, one with weather radar, one with traffic cameras, and one with my spreadsheet. I was on the radio constantly, guiding the drivers turn by turn. "Unit 4, slow down," I would say, staring at the elevation data. "There is a sharp grade in 2 miles, and the temp just dropped. It will be ice. Downshift now." "Copy that, Fiona," the driver would crackle back, trust absolute in his voice. I felt a rush I had never felt before. It wasn't just adrenaline, it was control. For years, I had been the victim of circumstances, of my mother's death, of Victoria's cruelty, of my father's weakness. I had been a leaf blowing in the wind. But that night, I was the wind. I was the one deciding where the energy went. I was moving tons of steel and food through a frozen hellscape, and I was winning. When the last truck pulled into the Freshmart dock at 4 a.m, just as the worst of the blizzard swallowed the world, the driver called in. "We are docked," he said. "The manager here is crying. He says we are the only trucks that made it through." I took off my headset and slumped back in my chair. The office was silent. Outside, the snow was howling, burying everything in white, but inside, the job was done. Henderson walked out of his office. He had been watching me for the last 6 hours, saying nothing. He placed a cup of hot cocoa on my desk. "You saved us," he said. "It was just a routing problem," I mumbled, my eyes burning with fatigue. "Just logic." "No," he shook his head. "That wasn't just logic. That was vision." He sat on the edge of my desk. "Fiona, I know I'm getting a bargain with you. I know you are worth 10 times what I pay you. But you need to hear this. If you don't open your own company, it is a waste. You are too big for this room." That sentence planted the seed. Too big for this room? I went home and slept for 14 hours. When I woke up, the world was still buried in snow, but my mind was clear. I didn't want to work for Henderson forever. I didn't want to save someone else's company. I wanted to build my own kingdom, one that nobody could kick me out of. I started studying. I didn't have money for graduate school, and I certainly wasn't going to ask my father for help. So I used the internet. I found free courses on Python and SQL. I found lectures on graph theory and network optimization from MIT's OpenCourseWare. My laptop was an old Dell that overheated if I opened too many tabs, so I propped it up on 2 books to let the air flow. I worked at Atlas Line during the day, handling the dispatch, and at night, I coded. I learned to speak the language of machines. I learned that a map wasn't just a drawing. It was a graph of nodes and edges. I learned that traffic wasn't just cars. It was a fluid, dynamic equation. I built a prototype. It wasn't pretty. It didn't have a sleek interface or a logo. It was a command line tool that looked like something from the 1980s. I called it SnowRoute. It allowed a user to input 20 different delivery stops, set the parameters for vehicle weight and cargo type, and then it scraped the National Weather Service API for real-time hyperlocal weather. It didn't just give the shortest route. It gave the route with the highest probability of arrival. It factored in risk. I needed a guinea pig. "Eddie," I said one afternoon in March, when the snow was turning to gray slush, "I have a friend. He owns a small grocery chain, Miller's Markets." "I know them," Eddie said. "They have 5 stores in the valley. Good people." "They are having trouble with their distributor," I said. "Their trucks are always late because the distributor uses a standard GPS that doesn't account for the back roads flooding in spring. Can you get me a meeting with Mr. Miller?" Eddie looked at me. He smiled, showing a gold tooth. "You are making a move, aren't you?" "I am trying," I said. "I will drive you there myself," he said. The meeting with Mr. Miller took place in a cramped office behind the deli counter of his flagship store. He was a skeptical man with flour on his apron and a deep distrust of technology. "I have a GPS," he said, waving his hand at a Garmin unit on his desk. "Why do I need your whatever this is?" "Because your GPS thinks the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line," I said, opening my laptop. "But in spring, the shortest distance is the one that isn't underwater. Look at this." I ran a simulation of his delivery route from the previous Tuesday, the day his milk delivery had been 4 hours late. "My system flags this bridge on Route 9. I pointed to the screen. "It floods whenever we get more than 2 inches of rain. Your driver got stuck there and had to backtrack 15 miles. My system would have sent him around the ridge. It is 10 miles longer, but he would have arrived 20 minutes early." "Mr. Miller leaned in. He looked at the red line on my screen where the bridge was. He looked at the green line I had proposed. "How much?" he asked. "I don't charge by the hour," I said. My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice steady. "I charge a service fee, $500 a month. For that, I optimize your routes every morning and send them to your drivers' phones." He looked at me. $500 was a lot of money to me, but to him, it was less than the cost of 1 spoiled pallet of milk. "First month is a trial," he said. "If the drivers complain, I don't pay." "Deal," I said. 3 weeks later, I sat in my tiny apartment. I had set up a folding table as a desk. Outside, the spring rain was hammering against the window, the kind of weather that used to make me feel small and cold. My email dinged. It was a notification from PayPal. "You have received $500 from Miller's Markets." I stared at the number. 500? It wasn't a fortune. It wouldn't buy a house or a diamond necklace, but it was the first money I had ever earned that didn't come with a boss telling me what to do. It was money I had created out of thin air, using nothing but my brain and my resilience. I opened a Word document and typed up a formal invoice for the next month. At the top, I didn't write Fiona Torres, employee. I typed SnowRoute Services. Then I paused. I deleted SnowRoute Services. I typed Fiona Torres, founder. It felt terrifying. It felt arrogant. But mostly, it felt right. I printed the invoice. I held the warm paper in my hand. I thought about the night I was kicked out, about the blood on my coat, about the way Victoria had looked at me like I was a parasite. I am not a parasite. I thought, I am the host. I pinned the invoice to the wall above my laptop. It was my first trophy, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me, that it would not be my last. The map was opening up, and for the first time, I was the one holding the pen. Denver was not just a city to me, it was a circulatory system. To the average tourist, it was mountains and craft breweries. But to me, it was the point where the east-west interstates collided with the north-south arteries. It was the place where cargo stopped to breathe before climbing the Rockies or sprinting across the plains. It was the only place root sphere dynamics could truly begin. I had legally changed the name of my company from the humble Snow Root to Root Sphere Dynamics on a Tuesday morning in a government building that smelled of floor wax and bureaucracy. Snow Root had been a tool for survival, a way to navigate a blizzard. Root Sphere was a declaration of war on inefficiency. It was a platform, an ecosystem, a way to see the world not as a series of obstacles, but as a solvable equation. However, vision does not pay the rent on a downtown office space, even a small one. I had exhausted my savings from the consulting gigs with Miller's Markets and the other local grocers. I needed capital. I needed someone to believe that a 24-year-old woman in a thrift store blazer could tell veteran trucking companies how to do their jobs. That was how I met Linda Kavanaugh. Linda was a legend in Colorado logistics. She had started with one warehouse in the 1980s and built an empire of cold storage facilities. She was 60 years old, with hair the color of steel wool and eyes that could appraise the value of a pallet in 3 seconds. I walked into her office with my laptop and a stomach full of acid. I had 15 minutes to pitch. "You are the girl who rerouted the Fresh Mart trucks during the bomb cyclone," Linda said, not looking up from her paperwork. She didn't offer me a seat. "I am the woman who saved Fresh Mart $50,000 in penalties," I corrected her, standing tall. "And I can do it for you." Linda stopped writing. She looked up. "Sit down." I opened my laptop. I didn't show her fancy graphics. I showed her the raw code. I showed her the predictive algorithm that factored in driver fatigue, road gradient, and real-time weather patterns to shave 8% off fuel costs. "Everyone has GPS," Linda said, leaning back. "Google Maps exists. Why do I need you?" "Google Maps tells you where the traffic is," I said. "Root Sphere tells you where the traffic will be in 4 hours based on a storm front moving in from Wyoming. Google helps you drive. I help you plan." Linda studied me. She wasn't looking at the screen anymore. She was looking at my hands, which were clenched on the edge of the table, and the scuff marks on my boots. "I was the only woman in the room for 30 years, Linda said softly. "When I started, drivers wouldn't take orders from me. Suppliers tried to overcharge me. They thought I would crack. They thought I would go home and cry." "I don't cry," I said. "I work." Linda smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous smile. "I am putting $200,000 in for 15% equity, and I want a seat on your board." 10% equity, I countered, "and you get the seat." Linda laughed. "Deal. Now get out of my office and go hire some engineers." With Linda's money, Root Sphere Dynamics moved from my kitchen table to a real office in a renovated warehouse district. It had exposed brick walls and big windows that looked out over the rail yards. I hired my first 5 employees, 3 developers, a data scientist, and a customer support lead. This was the test. This was the moment I had to decide what kind of house I was going to build. I grew up in a house where authority was a bludgeon, in the Torres household. If you made a mistake, you were humiliated. If you had an idea, you were silenced. Victoria managed by fear. She pitted us against each other, me against Brielle, Brielle against the world, my father against his own conscience. I vowed that Root Sphere would be the anti-Torres household. I remember the day our junior developer, a 19-year-old kid named Marcus, who reminded me painfully of myself at that age, crashed the server. He had pushed a bad line of code that took down our client portal for 20 minutes. I walked out of my office and saw him standing by his desk, shaking. The other employees were looking down, terrified, waiting for the explosion. They were waiting for the Victoria reaction, the screaming, the blaming, the public shaming. I walked up to Marcus. He flinched when I got close. "I am so sorry, Fiona," he stammered. "I will pack my things. I didn't mean to—" "Stop," I said gently. "I cost us uptime," he whispered. "I am stupid." "You are not stupid," I said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "You were trying to optimize the load speed, right?" "Yes," he nodded. "But I missed a bracket." "Okay," I said. "So we learned that the test environment needs a better safeguard before we push to production. That is a process failure, not a person failure. Marcus, I want you to lead the meeting on how we fix the testing protocol. Can you do that?" He looked at me, his eyes wide. "You are not firing me?" "If I fired everyone who made a mistake, I would be sitting in this office alone," I said. "We fix it together, then we move on." The tension in the room broke. Shoulders dropped. People breathed. In that moment, I felt a heavy chain around my own chest loosen, every time I treated an employee with the dignity I had been denied. I healed a little bit of the girl who had been slapped in a kitchen. As Root Sphere grew, our scope expanded. We weren't just doing winter routes anymore. We were optimizing supply chains for small businesses across 5 states. We were helping farmers get their crops to market before they spoiled. We were helping construction companies coordinate concrete pours. But the moment that changed everything happened in the spring of my second year as CEO. A massive flood hit the Midwest. Levees broke. Towns were isolated. The big logistics companies were paralyzed because their standard routes were underwater. I received a call from the regional director of emergency services. "We have truckloads of water and MREs," he said, sounding desperate. "But we can't get them to the shelters in Oak County. The bridges are out. Our drivers are getting lost." "Give me the data," I said. I pulled my entire team off their commercial projects. "Listen up," I told them. "Nobody pays us for this, but today, we aren't moving widgets. We are moving survival. We are going to map every back road, every dirt track, every high ground access point in Oak County. We worked for 48 hours straight. We slept under our desks. We ate cold pizza. We built a custom interface for the National Guard drivers. I watched the screen as the blue dots, the relief trucks, navigated the maze of floodwaters. I saw a dot reach a small town called Harper's Landing that had been cut off for 3 days. 20 minutes later, the director called me. "They made it," he choked out. "There are 300 people in that high school gym who just got water because of your map." I looked at the blue dot. I realized then that a map was not just lines on a screen. It was a lifeline. I wasn't just moving boxes. I was keeping people from being abandoned. I was making sure that when someone called for help, the answer arrived. A month later, a reporter from the Denver Post contacted me. She wanted to write a profile on the young female CEO disrupting the logistics industry. I agreed, on the condition that my personal life remained off limits. But reporters are good at digging. When the article came out, the headline read, "The Architect of the Road: How a Girl Cut Off by Her Family Became the CEO, Redrawing the Midwest." The reporter had found out about my estrangement. She didn't name Mark or Victoria, and she didn't name Oak Ridge, but she wrote, "Torres built her empire from a truck stop diner after leaving home with nothing but a coat and a laptop. She refuses to speak of the family she left behind, saying only that she learned the value of a safe route by not having one." I sat in my office, reading the paper. It felt exposing, but also liberating. The truth was out there, vague but undeniable. My phone buzzed. It was a message on the encrypted app I used to talk to Tessa. It was a picture of the article, spread out on a dorm room bed. "You did it," Tessa wrote. "I am reading this in the library between anatomy classes. I am crying. Fee, you actually did it. You proved them wrong." Tessa was 20 years old now, a nursing student at a university 3 hours away from Oak Ridge. She was brilliant and kind, but she was still trapped. Victoria had manipulated her into attending a school close enough to come home every weekend to care for our grandmother, Victoria's mother, who had moved in and was suffering from dementia. It was Victoria's way of keeping a leash on Tessa, using guilt as a shackle. "It is your turn next," I typed back. "Finish your degree, get your license. Then you come to Denver. I have a guest room waiting." "I can't leave Grandma yet," Tessa replied. "And Mom, she is getting worse, paranoid. She spends money we don't have. But seeing this article, it helps. It reminds me there is an exit." "There is always an exit," I wrote. "We just have to map it." That Christmas, I didn't go home. I hadn't gone home in 3 years. Instead, I stayed in the Root Sphere office. The building was empty. The lights dimmed. The servers hummed in the background. A comforting, steady sound. I pulled up the master map on the big screen in the conference room. It was beautiful. A spiderweb of glowing lines stretching across the country. Every moving dot was a driver who wasn't lost. Every green line was a promise kept. I thought about the Christmas 10 years ago, the smell of blood, the cold floor, the feeling of being absolute trash. I looked at the map. I was the CEO of a company valued at $5 million. I had 20 employees who trusted me. I had an apartment with a view of the mountains and a fridge full of food. I was not the girl on the floor anymore. "Merry Christmas, Fiona," I whispered to the empty room. I zoomed in on a truck moving through a snowstorm in Ohio, making sure it was safe, making sure it was on course. "I have got you," I said to the anonymous driver. "You are not alone." I was building the world I wanted to live in, a world where no one was left out in the cold, where the system worked, and where, if you screamed for help, someone was watching the screen, ready to guide you home. But I knew the past wasn't done with me. The article had made waves, and in a house in Oak Ridge, I knew a woman in a red dress was reading it, realizing that the stepdaughter she tried to crush had not just survived, she had learned to fly. The call came in at 11:45 on a Tuesday night in November. I was still in my office at Root Sphere, reviewing the quarterly projections for our expansion into the Pacific Northwest. The building was silent, save for the hum of the server room down the hall, a sound that usually calmed me. But when I saw Tessa's name flash on my phone screen, the calm shattered instantly. Tessa never called late. She knew I started my day at 5 in the morning. If she was calling now, the dam had broken. "Tessa," I answered, putting the phone on speaker and minimizing my spreadsheets. "He is going to sign it, Fiona." Her voice was wet, thick with tears, and shaking so hard I could barely understand her. "Tomorrow, he is going to sign the papers at the notary." "Slow down," I said, my voice automatically shifting into crisis management mode. "Who is signing what? Breathe. Dad," she sobbed. "Victoria made him set up this thing called the Torres Family Foundation. She says it is for tax benefits. She says it is to leave a legacy. But I heard her on the phone with her lawyer. The foundation is going to acquire the deed to the house as a charitable asset, and the board of directors is just her and Brielle." My fingers stopped moving on the keyboard. I closed my eyes and visualized the structure immediately. It was a shell game. "Let me guess," I said, my voice cold. "The foundation's charter includes a stipend for the directors, or a housing allowance?" "It is worse," Tessa said. "Once the house belongs to the foundation, she is going to liquidate it. She is going to sell it to pay off Brielle's debts. Brielle's studio in the city is failing. Fiona, she owes people money, huge money. Victoria is going to sell the house right out from under us to bail her out." "Where will you go?" I asked. "Where will Grandma go?" "She said we can rent an apartment," Tessa cried. "A 2-bedroom apartment on the south side, for 3 people. Grandma can't do stairs, Fiona, and I can't lose this house. It is the only leverage I have left." "Okay," I said. "I am buying a flight. I will be there tomorrow." "No!" Tessa shouted. "You can't come yet. If you come now, she will spin it. She will say you are trying to steal the inheritance. Dad is so brainwashed. He thinks she is a saint for setting up this charity. He thinks she is trying to save the family money. I have to do something. Tessa, I said. I can't let her put you on the street. There is something else, Tessa whispered. The line went silent for a moment, heavy with a confession she had been holding back for years. What is it? 3 years ago, she said, her voice dropping to a terrified murmur. When I was 17, I tried to show him. My blood went cold. Show him what? The video, she said. The video from Christmas Eve. I couldn't take it anymore. She was screaming at him about money, and he was just taking it. So I walked in, and I put my phone on the table. I pressed play. I showed him the clip where she slapped you. I showed him the part where he stood in the doorway and did nothing. I gripped the edge of my desk, and he watched about 10 seconds, Tessa said. He saw himself, and then he reached out and turned the phone over, face down. He didn't watch the end? No, Tessa said. He looked at me, and he looked so tired. Fiona, he said, Tessa, don't dig up old graves. It was a hard night. We were all stressed. Don't make things worse than they are. And then he walked away. I sat in my ergonomic chair, in my glass-walled office, 20 stories above Denver, and I felt a rage so pure and white-hot that it felt like clarity. For 10 years, I had told myself a story. I had told myself that Mark Torres was a victim. I told myself he was weak, beaten down, manipulated by a narcissist. I thought if he only knew the truth, if he only saw the reality, he would wake up. But he knew. He had been offered the truth, and he had turned it face down on the table because the truth was inconvenient. His silence that night wasn't a mistake. It was a choice he made every single day. He chose, I said softly. Okay, if he won't look at the screen when it is on a table, we will make sure he can't turn it over. What do you mean? Tessa asked. You said she is launching this foundation, I said. When? They are hosting a gala, Tessa said. A winter charity gala at the Oak Ridge Community Center. December 24th. It is supposed to be the official launch. They are inviting the mayor, the local press, everyone. She wants to look like a philanthropist. December 24th, I repeated. 10 years to the day. Fiona, what are you thinking? I am thinking that we are done playing defense, I said. Send me copies of the foundation paperwork you found. Send me photos of Brielle's debt notices if you can find them. And Tessa, get the video ready. It is ready, she said. I have it on 3 drives. Good, I said. We are going to buy a sponsorship. The next morning, I did not fly to Ohio. Instead, I called my general counsel, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah, who had helped me navigate the toughest contracts in the industry. I need to make a donation, I told her. Anonymous, large, to a new entity called the Torres Family Foundation. Sarah raised an eyebrow. The people who kicked you out? The very same, I said. But there are conditions attached to this donation. We are going to offer to cover the entire cost of their gala catering and venue rental, about $20,000, under the name of a shell trust. But the contract stipulates that the donor gets 20 minutes of presentation time to honor the community spirit of the foundation, and critically, the donor provides the audio-visual equipment. You want control of the screens, Sarah said, smiling slightly. I want control of the microphone, the projector, and the live stream feed, I said. If they sign, they get the money. Victoria is greedy. She won't turn down $20,000 of free money. It took 2 weeks to set the trap. Victoria took the bait exactly as I predicted. I saw the emails forwarded from the lawyer she thought was representing a wealthy, shy benefactor. She was thrilled. She bragged about it on the event page. A generous partner has recognized our vision, she wrote. Meanwhile, I turned my office into a war room. This wasn't just revenge. It was a logistics operation. The objective was the total dismantling of a false narrative. The timeline was tight. The margin for error was 0. I studied the documents Tessa scanned and sent to me via an encrypted server. The Torres Family Foundation was a joke. The bylaws were written so loosely that Victoria could legally withdraw funds for administrative lifestyle expenses. It was a piggy bank painted gold, and the transfer of the house deed was scheduled to be announced at the gala as the founding gift. "She is going to stand on stage," I told Tessa on a video call one night, "and announce that Mark is donating the family home to the foundation. That locks the asset. Once she does that, she controls it." "So we have to stop the announcement," Tessa said. She looked pale, sitting in her dorm room, dark circles under her eyes. "No," I said. "We let her start the announcement. We let her get all the way to the edge of the cliff, and then we turn on the lights." I needed a boots-on-the-ground technician. Tessa was smart, but she couldn't be seen tampering with the equipment, so I hired a private AV company from Columbus, one that I had used for RouteSphere conferences. I paid them double to follow my exact instructions. "You set up the projector," I told the lead technician. "You test the sound, and then, at exactly 8 o'clock, you hand the system control over to the laptop I will bring, no matter what anyone tells you. No matter who screams at you to cut the feed, you do not touch that power cord. You work for me." "Understood, Ms. Torres," he said. The final piece of the puzzle was the video itself. I hadn't watched it in years. Tessa had sent it to me again, and I sat in my apartment, staring at the file. A video file called Christmas Eve Evidence. I clicked play. The video was shaky at first, filmed from the crack of a pantry door. I saw the kitchen. I saw my 22-year-old self, thinner, terrified, wearing that cheap coat. I saw Victoria's back, the red dress tied across her shoulders. I heard the slap. It sounded like a whip crack. "Where is it?" Victoria screamed. Then, the camera panned slightly, and there he was, my father, standing in the doorway. He wasn't looking at the floor. He was looking right at me. He saw the blood. "Don't ruin Christmas," he said. I paused the video. I zoomed in on his face. There was no confusion there. There was only annoyance. He wasn't a confused man. He was a coward who had decided that his comfort was worth more than my safety. I closed the laptop. My hands were steady. "Tessa," I texted. "The file is loaded. I am bringing a backup on a USB drive. You keep a copy on your phone. If they cut the power to the projector, you upload it to the gala's Facebook event page instantly. We have a redundant system." "I am scared," she replied. "Don't be," I wrote back. "We have the map. They are just walking into the trap." 2 days before Christmas, I flew to Columbus. I rented a car, a black SUV with tinted windows. I didn't drive to Oak Ridge immediately. I stayed in a hotel near the airport, going over the plan with my lawyer. "You realize this is going to be a scene," Sarah said, looking at my notes. "You are going to humiliate them in front of the entire town." "I am not going to humiliate them," I said, adjusting the cuffs of my silk blouse. "I am just going to introduce a new data point. How they react to the data is up to them." I chose my outfit carefully. I didn't want to look like the poor stepdaughter who had come back to beg. I wore a deep navy jumpsuit, tailored to perfection, and a cream-colored wool coat that cost more than Victoria's entire wardrobe. I wore my hair back, sleek and professional. I looked like what I was, a CEO. On the morning of the 24th, I drove to Oak Ridge. The town looked the same, small, decorated with plastic Santas, frozen in a nostalgia that I now knew was fake. I parked 3 blocks away from the community center. I watched the guests arriving. I saw the mayor. I saw the banker who had helped Victoria hide the money. I saw the neighbors who had whispered about me when I left, believing the rumors that I was on drugs or unstable. And then I saw them. Mark was driving the family sedan. He looked older, grayer. Victoria was in the passenger seat, wearing a white fur coat that looked ridiculous in the damp Ohio chill. Brielle was in the back, checking her makeup in the mirror. They looked like a family. They looked happy. It was a lie built on a foundation of silence and a stolen college fund. I waited until everyone was inside. I waited until the live stream notification popped up on my phone. The Torres Family Foundation Gala is live. I put on my earpiece. I dialed the number of the AV technician inside. Status? I asked. We are green, he whispered. Mic is on the podium. Screen is lowered. You have remote access. Good, I said. I am coming in. I stepped out of the car. The snow was falling, just like it had 10 years ago. But this time, I wasn't running away into the dark. I was walking toward the light. I walked to the side entrance, where the catering staff was unloading trays. I flashed a badge that simply said, Donor Access. They let me in without a word. I stood in the wings of the stage, hidden by the heavy velvet curtain. I could hear Victoria's voice. She was at the podium. We are so blessed, she was saying, her voice thick with fake emotion. To be able to give back to this community that has given us so much. And tonight, we have a very special announcement. My husband, Mark, has decided to make a sacrifice that will ensure this foundation lives forever. I checked my watch. 8 o'clock? I signaled the technician. He cut the background music. Victoria paused, tapping the microphone. Is the sound working? The technician handed me a wireless microphone. I stepped out from behind the curtain. The stage lights were bright, blinding for a second, but I didn't blink. I walked to the center of the stage, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor with a rhythm that sounded like a ticking clock. The room went silent. You could hear a pin drop. Victoria turned. Her mouth fell open. The color drained from her face, leaving her makeup looking like a grotesque mask. Mark dropped his champagne glass. It didn't shatter. It just bounced on the carpet with a dull thud, spilling fizzing liquid over his shoes. Good evening, everyone, I said. My voice was calm, amplified, filling every corner of the room. I believe there is one more donation that needs to be acknowledged before we sign any deeds. I looked at Mark, I looked at Victoria, and for the first time in 10 years, they were the ones who were afraid. Who are you? The mayor asked from the front row, squinting. I am the logistics problem this family tried to delete, I said. My name is Fiona Torres, and I have brought the receipts. The backstage area of the Oak Ridge Community Center smelled of floor wax, stale coffee, and the unique, nervous perspiration of people trying to convince a room full of donors to part with their money. I stood in the wings, hidden by a heavy velvet curtain that had seen better decades. Beside me stood Sarah, my general counsel, who checked her watch with the precision of a Swiss train conductor, and Elena, my crisis PR manager, who was currently typing furiously on her phone. I smoothed the lapel of my coat. It was a cream-colored cashmere blend that reached my calves, worn over a deep navy jumpsuit tailored to look like armor. I had not come here to look soft. I had not come here to look like a daughter seeking forgiveness. I had come to look like a force of nature. 3 minutes to the announcement, Sarah whispered. The wire transfer is already queued. The moment you step off that stage, the check clears. They can't say you didn't pay for the mic time. I am not worried about the money, I said, my voice low. I am worried about the signal. Tessa is in position, Elena confirmed, glancing at her screen. She is in the AV booth. She texted green light 30 seconds ago. I closed my eyes for a heartbeat. I pictured the map of the Midwest in my mind, the glowing blue lines of my trucks moving through the night. I imagined this room as just another node in the network, a blockage that needed to be cleared. Ladies and gentlemen, the voice of the master of ceremonies boomed through the speakers. It was Mr. Collins, the local high school principal, wearing a tuxedo that was slightly too tight. We have a very special surprise this evening. As you know, the launch of the Torres Family Foundation has been made possible by the incredible generosity of a new partner, a mystery donor who insisted on covering the entire cost of tonight's gala. A ripple of polite applause moved through the room. I could hear the clinking of silverware against china. This donor is a titan in the logistics industry, Mr. Collins continued, reading from the card I had written for him. She is a woman who has revolutionized how we move goods across the Midwest. Her company was instrumental in delivering emergency food supplies to flood victims earlier this year. Please welcome the founder and CEO of Rootsphere Dynamics, Ms. Fiona Torres. The air in the room seemed to vanish. I stepped out from behind the curtain. The stage lights were blinding white, hot against my skin. I walked to the center of the stage, my heels striking the hardwood floor with a sharp, deliberate rhythm. I stopped at the podium and looked out at the sea of faces. For a moment, there was no applause. There was only a stunned, suffocating silence. I looked down at the front row. There they were. Victoria sat at the center table, her hand frozen halfway to her mouth, holding a glass of white wine. Her face, usually a mask of composed arrogance, had gone slack. Her eyes were wide, staring at me as if I were a corpse that had clawed its way out of the grave. She was wearing a white fur stole that looked grotesque under the harsh lights. Mark sat next to her. He blinked rapidly, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. He looked at me, then up at the massive projection screen behind me where my name was glowing in 10-foot-tall letters. Fiona Torres, founder and CEO, Rootsphere Dynamics. Brielle was the only one moving. She was frantically looking around the room, her eyes darting from the neighbors to the mayor, trying to gauge the social fallout before it even happened. Then, slowly, the applause started. It began with the people who didn't know the history. The mayor, the new business owners in town. Then, the neighbors joined in, driven by the awkward social pressure to clap for the woman who had apparently paid for their dinner. I waited for it to die down. I placed my hands on the sides of the podium. I didn't smile. "Thank you. Mr. Collins," I said. My voice was steady, amplified clearly through the room. "And thank you to the community of Oak Ridge. It is interesting to be back." I saw Victoria grip the stem of her wine glass so hard I thought it would snap. She whispered something to Mark, a hiss of venom, but he didn't move. He was staring at my shoes. "When I founded Rootsphere," I continued, "I learned that a supply chain is only as strong as its weakest link. You can have the fastest trucks and the best drivers, but if the map is wrong, you will never reach your destination. You will just drive in circles." I made eye contact with Mrs. Gable, the bank teller who had told me my college fund was gone. She looked down at her plate. "I learned the value of a map the hard way," I said, shifting my weight. 10 years ago, right here in this town, there was a girl who thought she had lost her way. She was 22 years old. She had just graduated from college with honors. She came home for Christmas hoping that, finally, she had done enough to be loved. The room grew heavy. The silence was no longer stunned. It was tense. The older residents, the ones who remembered the rumors, started to lean in. They looked from me to the Torres table. "That girl," I said, keeping my voice calm, almost conversational, "spent Christmas Eve in an apron, serving appetizers to people who wouldn't look her in the eye. And when a piece of jewelry went missing, a necklace much like the one Mrs. Torres is wearing tonight, that girl was accused of stealing it." Victoria's head snapped up. She looked at the necklace around her throat, her hand flying up to cover it. "She wasn't just accused," I said, my voice hardening slightly. "She was dragged into a kitchen. She was locked in. She was told that because she was a scholarship student, because she had to work for everything she had. She must be a thief. She was told she was a parasite." I saw Mark flinch. He shrank into his tuxedo, trying to make himself invisible. "And then," I said, "she was beaten." A gasp went through the room. It was audible, sharp. "She was slapped," I detailed. "She was shoved against a cabinet until her hip bruised. She was thrown to the floor, and she bled. She bled on the kitchen tiles while Christmas carols played in the living room." Victoria stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor, a harsh, screeching sound that made everyone jump. "This is a lie," she shouted. Her voice was shrill, cracking with panic. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "This is absolute slander. She is mentally unstable. She has always been jealous of this family." The room erupted into whispers. Mr. Collins looked terrified, unsure if he should cut the mic or call security. I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at her. "Sit down, Mark," Victoria yelled at my father, even though he hadn't moved. She turned to the crowd, her face flushed red. "My stepdaughter has a history of delusions. She ran away 10 years ago because she was on drugs. We tried to help her. This is a sick stunt to ruin our charity." She was desperate. She was throwing every lie she had constructed over the last decade against the wall, hoping one would stick. "I am not on drugs, Victoria," I said into the microphone. "I run a multi-million-dollar company, and I don't deal in delusions. I deal in data." "You are a liar," she screamed, stepping away from the table, moving toward the stage. "Get her off the stage! Security!" I looked down at her. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I asked. "Are you sure you want to call me a liar in front of the mayor? In front of the press?" "I know what happened," she shrieked. "You attacked me. You ruined Christmas. You are ungrateful trash." "And you, Mark?" I asked, looking past her to my father. "Is that how you remember it?" Mark looked up. His eyes were watery, filled with a pathetic, pleading fear. He didn't speak. He just shook his head slightly, begging me to stop. "Silence," I said. "That is what I remember, too. The silence of a father who stood in the doorway and watched." "He wasn't there," Victoria yelled. "He was with the guests. You are making this up." "Okay," I said. I looked toward the back of the room, toward the darkened glass of the AV booth. I raised my hand. "Tessa," I said. "Play it." Victoria froze. She looked around, confused. "Tessa? Tessa isn't here." The screen behind me went black. The Root Sphere logo disappeared. For a second, there was nothing. Then, a timestamp appeared in white text. December 24th, 2014. The audio started first. It was loud. The speakers in the hall were concert quality, and they picked up the sound of the slap with terrifying clarity. It sounded like a gunshot. Then the image resolved. It was vertical video, shaky, filmed through the crack of a door, but it was clear enough. On the massive screen, 20 feet high, the entire town of Oak Ridge saw Victoria Torres in her red dress. They saw her face contorted in a snarl that no amount of Botox could hide. "Give me the necklace, or I swear to God. Fiona, I will destroy you," the Victoria on the screen screamed. The real Victoria, standing in the aisle, put her hands over her mouth. She staggered back, bumping into a waiter. On the screen, the slap happened. The audience watched as my younger self, so thin, so terrified, was struck across the face. They watched my head snap back. They watched me fall against the cabinets. "Oh my God," someone in the front row whispered. But the video didn't stop. The door in the video opened, and there was Mark. He looked younger on the screen, his hair less gray. He stood in the doorway, holding a glass of wine. He looked at the bleeding girl on the floor. He looked at his wife. The camera zoomed in slightly. Tessa's hand must have trembled. "Dad, help me," the voice on the screen pleaded. And then, the voice of Mark Torres boomed through the gala hall, echoing off the rafters. "Victoria, enough. You are making a scene. People are staring. Fiona, just apologize to your mother. Don't ruin Christmas for everyone." The video cut to black. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum. No one breathed. No one moved. The air felt sucked out of the room. Every single pair of eyes in the hall turned to Mark Torres. He was still sitting at the table. He was staring at the black screen. His face pale as a sheet. He looked like a man who had been stripped naked in the middle of a blizzard. Victoria was shaking. She looked at the screen, then at the crowd. She opened her mouth to speak, to spin another lie, to say it was deepfake, to say it was out of context. "That," she stammered, "that isn't—" "Don't," I said. I didn't shout it. I said it with the quiet authority of a CEO closing a boardroom meeting. "Don't insult their intelligence," I said. "We all saw it, we all heard it, and most importantly, Mark saw it." I walked to the edge of the stage. I looked down at my father. "You worried about ruining Christmas," I said. "You were so worried about the noise. Well, Dad, it is pretty quiet now. Do you have anything you want to say?" He didn't speak. He couldn't. The weight of 10 years of cowardice was crushing him into his chair. Brielle had her head in her hands, weeping silently. The mayor was signaling his wife to get her coat. The press photographers, who had been hired to capture a charity launch, were now frantically snapping photos of the implosion of the Torres family. I looked at the crowd one last time. "My name is Fiona Torres," I said. "I didn't steal a necklace. I didn't run away on drugs. I survived. And tonight, I am taking back my name." I signaled to the tech booth again. "Cut the feed." I turned and walked off the stage. I didn't look back at them. I didn't need to. The map had been redrawn. The obstruction had been cleared. And for the first time in my life, the path ahead was completely, perfectly open. The video cut to black, but the image of my father standing passively in that doorway seemed to burn itself into the retina of every person in the room. The silence that followed was not the respectful silence of a gala audience. It was the horrified, breathless silence of a community realizing they had been applauding a lie for a decade. Victoria was the first to break it. She scrambled up the steps to the side of the stage, her high heels clacking frantically against the wood. She looked like a trapped animal, her eyes wide and feral, scanning the tech booth as if she could physically claw the footage back into obscurity. "Turn it off!" she screamed, her voice cracking into a high, jagged shriek that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. "That is out of context. It is a fabrication. You don't understand the stress we were under that night." She turned to the audience, her hands trembling as she smoothed her white fur stole, which now looked less like a symbol of status and more like a costume. "It was a misunderstanding," she pleaded, pointing a shaking finger at the blank screen. "Fiona was out of control. We were trying to restrain her. The video is edited. It is a trick." But nobody moved. Nobody nodded. The whispers started, low at first, then swelling like a rising tide. "I remember that year," a woman in the second row murmured to her husband, loud enough to be heard. "Fiona just vanished. Victoria told the church group she had run off with a boyfriend." "She was bleeding," another voice said. "Did you see her lip? That wasn't restraint. That was assault." The wall was coming down. The brick-and-mortar facade of the perfect Torres family, which Victoria had spent 10 years tucking and pointing, was crumbling into dust right in front of her. I walked down the stairs from the stage. I moved slowly, deliberately. I did not look at Victoria, who was still raving at the technician in the booth. I walked straight to the center table. I stopped in front of Mark Torres. My father was still sitting there. He was gripping the tablecloth with both hands, his knuckles white. He was staring at the empty screen, his eyes glassy. He wasn't looking at the gala. He was looking at a ghost. He was looking at the man he had been 10 years ago, the man who had chosen a quiet dinner over his daughter's safety. I stood there until he felt my presence, slowly, painfully. He turned his head to look up at me. "I didn't turn that on to humiliate you, Dad," I said. My voice was quiet, intimate, just for him, though I knew the people at the nearby tables were straining to hear. "I didn't do it to destroy your reputation. I just wanted him," I pointed to the black screen, "to finally ask you why you stood still." Mark opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His face crumpled. It wasn't the polite, socially acceptable sadness he usually wore. It was real. It was ugly. It was the face of a man realizing that he had sold his soul for a piece that never existed. Victoria realized she was losing the room. She rushed down the stairs, pushing past a waiter, and grabbed Mark's shoulder. "Mark, tell them," she hissed, her nails digging into his tuxedo jacket. "Tell them she is lying. Tell them she attacked me." Mark looked at her hand on his shoulder. Then he looked at me. "I can't," he whispered. "What did you say?" Victoria snapped. "Speak up. Defend your family." Mark stood up. He was shaking, but he stood. He pulled away from her grip, stepping into the space between his wife and his daughter. "I was wrong," he said. His voice was hoarse, rusty from years of disuse. He cleared his throat and spoke louder, his voice carrying to the stunned onlookers. "I was wrong," Mark repeated. "I was a coward. I saw you hit her. Victoria, I saw her bleeding on the floor, and I chose my own comfort over my daughter." A gasp went through the room. "Mark," Victoria gasped, looking at him as if he had slapped her. "What are you doing?" "I am telling the truth," Mark said, tears spilling onto his cheeks. "For the first time in 10 years, I chose peace. I chose quiet, and it cost me my child." He looked at me, his eyes pleading for a forgiveness I wasn't ready to give, but his admission was the only thing I had ever truly wanted. "I am so sorry, Fiona," he choked out. "I let you down. I failed you." Victoria looked around the room. She saw the judgment in the eyes of the mayor, the disgust in the faces of her social circle. She saw her power evaporating. She turned back to me, her face twisting into a mask of pure venom. "Fine," she spat. "You made your point. You embarrassed us. Are you happy? But you are still nothing. You are still the girl who walked out with nothing. And this house," she pointed a finger at the floor, "this foundation, it is all mine. I control the assets. I control the deed. So get out of my sight before I have you arrested for trespassing." I looked at Sarah, my lawyer, who was standing quietly by the stage. Sarah nodded and stepped forward, holding a sleek black portfolio. "Actually, Mrs. Torres," Sarah said, her voice projecting with the cool authority of the courtroom, "that is not entirely accurate." "Who are you?" Victoria demanded. "I am general counsel for Root Sphere Dynamics," Sarah said, "and I have just filed a motion with the county court regarding the Torres Family Foundation. Given the evidence of coerced asset transfer and the pending investigation into the misappropriation of funds for personal debts, a judge has granted a temporary injunction. The foundation's accounts are frozen." "You can't do that," Victoria shrieked. "That is my money." "Furthermore," Sarah continued, ignoring her, "regarding the property at 42 Oak Street, the family home." Sarah opened the portfolio and pulled out a document stamped with the county seal. "Fiona was aware that you intended to transfer the deed to the foundation tonight to liquidate it," Sarah said. "However, the house was heavily leveraged. Mark had taken out 3 second mortgages to cover your daughter Brielle's business losses." Brielle, sitting at the table, put her head down on the white tablecloth and sobbed. "The bank was preparing to foreclose," Sarah explained. "But debt is a commodity. It can be bought, and Root Sphere Dynamics has purchased the note." I stepped forward, closing the distance between Victoria and myself. "I bought the debt, Victoria," I said. "I own the mortgage, and as of this morning, I have executed a transfer of ownership." I looked past her, toward the AV booth where Tessa was watching. "I am not keeping the house," I said, my voice ringing out. "I am placing the deed in a trust. The beneficiaries are Tessa Torres and Grandma. They have a lifetime right of residency. You cannot sell it. You cannot kick them out. And if you want to stay there, you will have to answer to Tessa." Victoria staggered back. She looked at Mark, her eyes wide with panic. The house was her leverage. It was her retirement plan. It was her shield. And in 3 sentences, I had turned it into a prison where she was no longer the warden. "You," she stammered, "you can't do this." "It is done," I said. "It is just logistics. I moved the asset to a safer location." Victoria spun around to Mark, grabbing his lapels, shaking him. "Mark," she screamed, "are you going to let her do this to us? She is stealing our home. She is destroying us. Do something." Mark looked at her hands. He looked at her face, contorted with greed and fear. He gently, firmly, took her wrists and removed her hands from his jacket. "There is no us, Victoria," he said. The room was so quiet you could hear the snow hitting the windows outside. "You did this," Mark said, stepping back from her. "You built this house on cruelty, and now it has collapsed." He turned to me. He looked like a man who had just woken up from a 10-year coma, disoriented, in pain, but awake. "Fiona," he started, reaching out a hand. I looked at his hand. I didn't take it. I am glad you finally spoke, Dad, I said. I really am, but you waited 10 years too long. You can't fix a foundation that is this cracked just by saying sorry. I turned to the side of the room where Tessa had emerged from the booth. She ran to me, her face wet with tears, and threw her arms around my neck. I held her tight, feeling the solid reality of her. She was safe. She had a home. Let's go, I whispered to her. Where? She asked. Anywhere, I said. We have the map. We walked toward the exit. The crowd parted for us like the Red Sea. No one spoke. No one tried to stop us. We walked past the mayor, past the banker, past the neighbors who had judged me. They looked at us with a mixture of awe and shame. As I pushed open the double doors of the community center, the cold night air hit me. It was crisp and clean, smelling of pine and snow. It was the same air I had breathed 10 years ago when I walked away with a bloody lip. But tonight, it didn't bite. It felt like a baptism. We stepped out into the snow. The flakes were falling softly, covering the world in a fresh, white sheet. I looked back one last time through the glass doors. I saw Victoria standing alone in the center of the room, a small figure in a red dress, surrounded by the ruins of her own making. I saw Mark sitting with his head in his hands. I took Tessa's hand. We walked down the steps, our boots crunching on the fresh powder. 10 years ago, on Christmas Eve, my father stood in a doorway and watched his wife beat me, and he said nothing. He chose silence. Tonight, 10 years later, he was forced to watch that silence play out on a 20-foot screen in front of the entire town. The recording didn't just expose them. It didn't just break the facade. It gave me back the coordinates of my own life. I looked up at the night sky, at the vast, open network of stars that looked like the nodes of the greatest map ever drawn. This Christmas, for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting outside anyone's door, hoping to be let in. I wasn't waiting for a text. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I had built my own house. I had drawn my own route. And as I opened the car door for my sister, I realized that the best gift I had ever given myself wasn't the company, or the money, or the vindication. It was the ability to open the door for myself. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on the ending. If you enjoyed this journey, please make sure to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.